Be they stalwart protectors clad in plate, powerful druids shapeshifted into towering bears, elusive monks, or mighty demon hunters, the tank is the character that protects their friends. But how do you tank? Well, let me show you. Hello there and welcome to the Tanking Guide. Over this series of videos we'll discuss everything you need to know to become a master tank. In the last lesson we learned all there is to know about threat, the underlying system that drives a core mechanic to tanking. We learned how to generate and keep threat using our abilities so that the enemies are attacking us, not our squishy friends. But what makes a tank capable of actually surviving the wrath of their foes? Keeping their attention won't be worth much if you die. So, in this lesson, we'll discuss survival. Now, tanks have a variety of means with which to survive, and it all boils down to one very important and particular word: mitigation. To mitigate an attack is to reduce the damage you take from it, and, in a nutshell, this is how tanks survive: by mitigating attacks. Be it by using a holy shield to absorb damage, raising a shield to block strikes, dodging an attack, or to surround oneself with floating protective bones, a tank has two ways of mitigating attacks: passive and active mitigation. Let's start with passive mitigation. This is how it works. Passive mitigation is a collection of statistics that are always active. You don't need to do anything whatsoever for these stats to help you mitigate damage. Passive mitigation statistics are armor. This reduces the physical damage you take by a certain amount. The percentage of this reduction can be increased by obtaining gear with the bonus armor stat on it. There are 4 types of armor in the game: cloth, leather, mail, and plate, and each one offers different levels of mitigation, with plate armor offering the most. Some classes, like warriors, even gain attack damage based upon how much of the bonus armor stat they have. Dodge. This is a percentile chance for you to dodge a melee attack when it comes in. If your character dodges an attack, they take no damage whatsoever. You have no way of raising the passive chance to dodge, but some classes, such as Guardian Druids, have abilities that temporarily increase their dodge chance. Every class can dodge, but players can only dodge attacks from enemies that they are facing. If you lose control of your character, for instance by getting stunned, you won't be able to dodge during the duration of the stun. Parry. This, like dodge, is a percentile chance for you to parry a melee attack with your weapon, Jedi Knight style. And when you do so, the attack deals no damage. Again, you have no way of directly increasing this aside from a small bonus based upon strength. You don't really need to worry about increasing your parry chance through extra strength, you just need to know how the parry mechanic works. All melee classes except for druids can parry attacks, because you can't really parry an attack with your head. Just like dodges, only attacks from enemies that you're facing will be eligible for being parried. And if you lose control of your character, you won't be able to parry until you regain control. Finally, block. Block is a statistic that pertains to shield items. Whenever you have a shield equipped, you have a flat percentile chance to block a melee attack with the shield. When blocked, the attack will deal reduced damage. Warriors and paladins can raise their chance to block attacks by increasing their mastery stat. And there's even something called critical blocking, which is a warrior-only attribute which adds a chance to double the amount blocked. Naturally, only characters with shields can block attacks. Just like with dodge and parry, if you lose control of your character, you can't block attacks, and only attacks from enemies facing you can be blocked. To put all of these statistics into perspective, let's look at a simple, basic melee attack from an enemy fighting a warrior. As it flies towards the warrior, the attack has a percentage chance to be parried or dodged, where the warrior will completely negate all of the damage, wasting the attack. If it does hit the warrior, it will deal reduced damage thanks to their armor. There's even a chance for it to be reduced in damage even more thanks to the warrior blocking it with their shield. You see, enemies have a tough time getting their full damage out on a tank, because there are so many ways for the tank to passively reduce the damage they take without them even needing to do anything. So those are examples of passive mitigation, but these statistics alone won't keep you alive through vicious assaults from dangerous foes. You're going to need to do that yourself, with active mitigation. This is damage reduction that you activate yourself. Abilities that reduce the damage you take, or temporarily increase your passive mitigation chance. Every tank has a form of active mitigation, each of which is dependent upon resources and cooldowns. Let's go over them class by class. Death Knight's active mitigation comes from their Death Strike ability. combined with their mastery statistic. Whenever a Blood Death Knight uses Death Strike, it heals them for a small amount and generates a blood shield on them for a percentage of the amount healed. This shield blocks damage. The shield has to be depleted before the Death Knight can take health damage, so a Death Knight has the capability to shield themselves by using an ability. However, Death Strike costs runes, the class's resource, to use, so there is a limit as to how often a Death Knight can use their active mitigation. Next, Guardian Druids. Their active mitigation is called Savage Defense, and this, unlike a Death Knight's Death Strike, is a purely defensive ability that deals no damage. Instead, it increases the Druid's dodge chance by 45% and reduces the physical damage they take by 20%, lasting for 6 seconds. It has 2 charges and a 12-second cooldown, and costs 60 rage to use. Rage is the Druid's resource, they generate it by being in combat and using other abilities. Again, this is an ability that dramatically reduces damage taken, but it's also constrained by resources and cooldowns. Up next, Brewmaster Monks. Their active mitigation is Elusive Brew. Whenever they critically hit with an auto attack, they gain a few stacks of the Elusive Brew buff, stacking up to 15. They can consume this stacking buff using the Elusive Brew ability. When used, it consumes all stacks of the buff to increase the chance to dodge melee and ranged attacks by 45%, lasting 1 second for each stack of the buff consumed. Although it has no resource cost, it takes time to generate Elusive Brew stacks, so it's constrained by time rather than resources. Next, Protection Paladins. Shield of the Righteous is their active mitigation. When used, it deals damage to an enemy and decreases the physical damage the paladin takes by 25% for 3 seconds. It also increases their healing done, so paladins have an active mitigation mechanic that also aids them in healing themselves with other abilities. Despite the fact that Shield of the Righteous has a very short cooldown, it is constrained by Holy Power, the paladin's resource. Other abilities generate Holy Power, and Shield of the Righteous consumes 3 Holy Power to activate, so the paladin's active mitigation is constrained by their ability to generate Holy Power. Finally, Warriors. They actually have 2 forms of active mitigation, Shield Block and Shield Barrier. Shield Block increases their block chance to 100% for 6 seconds, letting them block every attack on them, and Shield Barrier creates a damage shield for 6 seconds, letting them absorb attacks. Shield Block has a 12-second recharge and has 2 charges, and costs 60 rage, the warrior's resource. Shield Barrier has a very short, less than 2-second cooldown, but it also costs rage, 20 to begin with, and it will consume up to an additional 40 more to make the absorption shield stronger. So, the warrior's active mitigation is constrained by their ability to generate rage. That's how each class handles active mitigation, and the various constraints they have means that it's impossible for a tank to mitigate every single attack. Of course, you're going to want to do all you can to mitigate as much as possible. So, we have passive ways of mitigating damage and active ways too. But what about when we're in over our heads? When we're fighting so many enemies that we start getting overwhelmed? Or we're fighting a gigantic enemy that hits so hard that even our active mitigation can't keep us alive for very long? Well, that's where cooldowns come in. A cooldown is an extremely powerful ability with really cool effects, constrained primarily by their extremely long recharge periods. They may do things like heal you back to full health, increase your maximum health for a few seconds, reduce all damage taken for a few moments, reduce the damage enemies do, or all kinds of other effects. Some cooldowns may have a 1, 2, 3, 5, or even 10-minute recharge time, so the most important thing to think about when using a cooldown is to consider how effective it will be. There are lots of things to think about when it comes to cooldowns, with some boss encounters designed in such a way to encourage tanks to use their cooldowns at certain times. But here are a few general tips to help you get the most out of them. The first thing you should consider is that wasting a cooldown when you're taking low damage is a pretty bad idea. But the second thing you should consider is that dying because you didn't use a cooldown to help save your life is even worse. So, if you're still learning how to tank effectively, or you feel like you're in really dangerous situations, use your cooldowns to help you survive. As you get more comfortable with how to play your tank and use your active mitigation, you'll find yourself holding onto your cooldowns for more and more dangerous situations. Examples of good times to use cooldowns are in situations where you know you will be taking lots of damage, either because you're fighting loads of enemies or because an enemy has used an ability that increases their damage, or an ability that just deals loads of damage to you. If you see your health start dropping quickly, then use a cooldown to help control the damage you're taking. Just remember that sometimes you'll take damage from things you can avoid, by moving your character. Keep an eye on your feet. If you can step to the side to avoid damage, you can mitigate even more damage, or avoid having to use a cooldown entirely. Also, it's important to remember that your cooldowns will stack. So if you use an ability that reduces the damage you take, and an ability that increases your health, you'll be even more difficult to kill than if you use those cooldowns separately. This can be great in emergencies when your health really starts to dip low. These techniques require that you keep a close eye on your health, so make sure you move it to a part of the screen that you can see really well. Never be surprised by low health. There are a couple of small, more advanced things you can do to help mitigate damage as well. The first one is to use a flask. This is a consumable item that you can make as an alchemist or buy on the auction house. Try to get your hands on Greater Dranic Stamina Flasks. These increase your health by a big amount for 1 hour. Also consider buying or making some healing tonics, made by practitioners of first aid or bought on the auction house. These let you heal yourself once per fight, which can mean the difference between barely surviving and ending up on the floor. Finally, remember this. Mitigation won't always save you. Even though you have passive ways to mitigate damage, active spells that will reduce damage, and cooldowns that are really powerful, you'll either eventually run out of ways to mitigate incoming damage, get caught out by big spikes of damage, or just bite off more than you can chew. You can't survive everything. Dying is inevitable, but don't let it get to you. Every tank dies, and surviving is something that everyone of every role has to consider. Although you're the first line of defense and survival is obviously super important to you, situations in World of Warcraft are designed for everyone to consider, not just any one player. Teamwork will always help. That concludes the lesson about surviving. We've learned how our passive mitigation helps us to avoid damage without having to do anything, how super important active mitigation keeps us both busy and alive through enemy attacks, and how we should use our cooldowns to help survive whenever we're nervous or in danger. Survival is critical to your role as a tank, and as you continue to learn, you'll get better and better at judging your own health and how to mitigate damage effectively. Next time, we'll talk about your enemies, and how controlling them will make your life much easier. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments or suggestions, you can contact me using the links in the description, or you can just leave a comment. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I wish you the best of luck in the World of Warcraft.